It would have been impossible for anyone who didn't know the lay of the land to accomplish what he had done. It had taken him 6 hours as it was. The roads were still covered deep, and the woods were still choked with snow and ice. He had managed to get here today only by working his way across each and every ridge he knew to lie between here and his old blue truck. His old blue truck was still parked back in Madras. That old truck had come down the nameless route only a few miles before it had mired in so deeply that he'd had to walk back to the Pine View Lodge and rent a week's worth of rooms for himself. He had not been pleased with that at all. That had been just prior to this bitch of a blizzard, and he had been taken totally by surprise. What should have been a 20-minute trip to Madras had taken the better part of a week. He was glad he had Brandy stocked up on canned goods and water rations. She would be ready for a home-cooked when he got back, for sure. But walking back across the fields a while ago, he had seen a lot of smoke coming from both his chimneys. That meant only one thing. Brandy was out of her cage. Out and making fires. Cooking, most likely, over a hot flame in the kitchen. The captor, using the ridges and the pastures, had manipulated his way back home. He had waded through 3 feet of snow in places, but most of the snow had blown around, drifted into the valleys below. His walk had been long and cold, but he was here now. He sniffed and placed his wire clippers back in his jacket pocket. He would not want to deal with her just now. She'd probably bolted the old front door, and he didn't feel like breaking any glass. No, tonight he would stay in his own place. He looked in the backyard. If he could find it, that was. He started walking around the house, and using his arms, he plowed as best as he could through the backyard. It was 6 feet deep out back here, and going was more like tunneling for him. He had a small army shovel that he'd taken out of his truck, and now he unfolded it from the shoulder harness. He began shoveling great hunks of snow in back of himself, making his way towards that old root cellar in the backyard. In the distance he could just make it out, even though it was just 25 yards from his house. It was built on a small mound of hill that his father had made up to hide the set of stairs going into the earth. A real root cellar-looking thing, but it hadn't been a root cellar at all. At the time, his father had made an elaborate bomb shelter. This had been in the 50s, when the Russian scare had happened. His father had been crazy, he thought then, and he thought it now as well. A product of the Russian scare when UFO movies subliminally suggested that the Russians were aliens coming for their lives. His father had the fear on him bad. During the Red Scare, he feared nuclear destruction so badly he had installed this root cellar storm shelter out back and had a tunnel in the ground from the shelter to the basement of the house. When the captor got ready to go inside his house, he would just go through his secret tunnel. It was so easy to sneak up on Brandy this way. He might not even switch her behind too hard when he caught her outside her room, simply because it would be so easy to catch her. He made it to the mound of snow-covered dirt, and he knocked the ice and old snow off the door with his shovel. He finally found the lock, and using his frozen fingers, he managed to fumble out the proper key with which to unlatch it. He got the lock open, after heating the opening of the lock with his lighter to unfreeze the hole. This always worked well for him, because he used such expensive locks. Except the one on Brandy's door. Damn, he should have known better. The captor was a big man, and he wasn't as old as he looked. He wore his hair long and unkempt in a mass of loose ponytail that never seemed to take any form. It was just shaggy as it could be, and his long ratty beard added to his appearance in unflattering ways. With his snow parka on and his wizened-iced features, he looked for the world like the Flying Dutchman. He looked like this for a reason, to hide his identity. He didn't want anyone to know what he looked like, except to say he looked like some old mountain goat of a man who had probably lost the full ability to speak. In this way, Strangers didn't try to start conversations with him that he didn't want, and no one messed with him at all. No one would have cared to follow him back to this lair to see if he had a young girl hostage in here. He thought of his father's fear of the old Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles, and he shook his head. "Well, Dad, you did get me a nice place to get away from my captive for a few minutes. You was right about her, too, Dad. You said that all women would worry hell out of you. I've got to say your old bomb shelter here works wonders for times like this. It's just a home away from her, it really is." He smiled his greasy smile and started down the steps into the mound of dirt that comprised the entrance to his shelter. He felt for the long string as he reached the bottom of the 12 steps, twirling his hand over his head until he found it. He pulled the string, and the buzzing commenced from the ceiling just ahead of him. Then a bluish light bamped on, and a fluorescent tube cast its glow all around the space ahead of him. The bluishness soon burned to a bright white. He saw the first area in front of him, for it couldn't exactly be called a room. It was more like a dugout in a baseball diamond. It was about 20 feet by 10 feet, and was opened on the far end into another chamber. The first chamber here was furnished with carpet over the barren earth floor, and a refrigerator and stove assembly was wired to the main house. He saw that they were working beautifully still. The storm had not ruined his cold beer supply, nor his cold foods. Terrific. He went over and popped himself an icy beer. Winter or summer, the captor liked his beer. He drank it all the time down here. He meandered over to the stove and set his can down upon the white surface, turning to look behind him. Everything seemed in order here. Brandy hadn't found her way down here yet. Beautiful. He stared back over his shoulder at the far wall, where the steps went up and out into the backyard. Beside these steps was a door, built right into the dirt. A building inspector would have condemned this place a long time ago, but fortunately there weren't any out this far. Nature had been very tolerant of this old place over the years. Instead of unsupported walls just caving in and imploding these rooms with soil and tons of dirt, they had hardened just as his dad had dug them. This place should have been in Ripley's Believe It or Not. It was one of the 8 or 9 wonders of the world. He went over and opened the old freezer-style door that was hinged into the dirt on a steel frame. He recalled his dad putting 10-inch rebar stays into the frame of the old freezer door, which had been taken from a fast food restaurant that had been torn down over in Madras back in the 60s. The door was solid in its frame, and was now as much a part of that old underground dirt wall as the soil itself. He opened the door, the old seal still locking out the air inside, and he stepped through the frame. He put his hand up to the side of the door as he crossed over the threshold. He had to crouch a little bit to step through, but once inside the tunnel he could straighten up. He reached up now and cut on another light, attached to yet another string. As he did so, an infinite-looking row of small light bulbs came on, spanning the distance of the tunnel, back towards the house. He had always loved this tunnel, even as a kid. These dim little bulbs were so cool, like landing lights going out of sight in the distance. He smiled and stepped back out of the tunnel, snapping off the light again. No one had been in here. Across the mouth of the tunnel, about 10 feet into the darkness, he had tied a small piece of black thread. The thread was still up, so Brandy hadn't come through here, or she would have knocked it down. Some of that good shit he had learned in Vietnam. He went back into the first chamber now, and then through the porthole doorway to the second chamber. In here was his great chair and his bed. He loved it back in here. He went over and laid down on the cold bed. His chair was still there, a lazy-boy-looking thing with his straps installed, with which he worked on his subjects. Brandy had been his last one, but she had been programmed never to remember this room. Perhaps it was that she didn't recall it. He liked to think so, anyway. Kaina had been right about him using drugs on his subjects, but he didn't use his drugs on them. He used the patient's drugs on themselves. He smiled to even think of the concept. It was brilliant, wasn't it? The captor was an advanced hypnotist. He had been a Berkeley college bum in the late 60s, before the war effort, and he had learned some of the most intense dudes on the planet. Guys like Timothy O'Leary, disciple of Jonathan Ashbery. The wild things that man could come up with defied gravity. He had been a principal in the hypnosis craze that passed at the time as scientific research. Anything had passed as scientific research in the 60s. He remembered fondly. The hypnosis they had investigated was deeper, much deeper than what you were to study in Hypno 112, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9 to 11 a.m. The things they studied were after hours, and would have freaked most people out. The captor paused a moment to wonder where these people were anymore. He smiled to think what they would say if they had known he had taken Brandy Bam Bam Manson for a pet. Man, they'd freak out. He had abducted Brandy and resurrected her soul within her. She might have a chance of living to be 40 years old now, with him as her personal guru. She would not have survived the year if he had not taken her hostage. Brandy had been addicted to crack cocaine. Crack cocaine and God knew what all else. That's why he had removed her from population. She was at least beginning to menstruate again. The anorexia thing no longer threatened her life. The captor had taken Brandy for one reason: to save her life. No one would believe this. He didn't care what they believed. He didn't care about anyone else in the world but her. She was his favorite idol, and she had no one in the world who gave a damn about her. That just wasn't right. This he had sought to rectify. If there was one in the world, out of all of her fans and audience of admirers, who wouldn't take the time to straighten her little ass out, well, then he would have to do it. He sighed now, sipping his beer. It had been a terrific sacrifice on his part, to do what he had done. The cost of getting her room ready, and the time he would have to spend with her. Very expensive, both in time, money, and love. But he did love her. He did want to see her rise above those blue porno movies. And she had made some beauties, too. He had pirated every one of them for his VCR archives. She was meant for the big screen, though. Something other than grainy porno vision. Something other than the pimps and whoremongers with which she was forced to contend. Brandy was his baby, and if no one else cared enough to save her life, he would do it, free of charge. Brandy had been out of New York hospital 72 hours when he'd seen her walking along with those damn fag hags from the party circuit. She went that way every night with that same bunch of assholes. It was so easy to get her. All he'd had to do was pull up, put her in, and leave. No questions asked. They didn't even get his tag number. He had chloroformed her for miles and miles because he knew that the press said she was suffering from exhaustion. That short a time out of the hospital, and here she was at 3 a.m., wandering around like Night of the Living Dead with a bunch of zombies. She would have died inside of a week had he let her keep on hoofing it behind those geeks. But he hadn't done so. He had snatched her. She was addicted to crack, but that's no problem to break. All she has to do is quit lighting the friggin' pipe, and she can shake that. He was no stranger to narcotics himself, and he had plenty of methadone squirreled away for her when she got to his place. He had been a fan of tea and lemons in his day. This lethal-sounding mix of uppers and downers did twist his soul a lot, but it didn't do any real damage. As he would watch Brandy, night after night, dry heave her guts up into her mouth, he thought that this ice, or crack, or whatever it was, must be some truly wicked shit to do her like that well over a week. Even horse didn't keep you in the dry-out heaves but about 72 hours. Anything worse than heroin, and he didn't even like to think about it. Unless she had another addiction that he didn't know about. Well, his synthetic morphine and that methadone had calmed her enough to continue living while she broke the evil chains of her follies, whatever they had been. Now she did nothing at all, and she would be very healthy indeed if he'd start feeding her right. Well, now he was going to do that, in fact. In fact, he was going to do it when the storm had hit. He had placed her on a strict diet of simple foods in the beginning, so she would learn to live a calm life. He was feeding her vitamins and vegetables, even though they were all frozen and store-bought. No matter, but he'd had to go to the store when he'd left her last week. She couldn't live on milk, egg beaters, and bacon for very long now, could she? She had to have some good solid food in her. Anyone looking in his freezer right now would think he was starving the poor kid to death, but the truth was, she didn't eat very much. He had told her that, in order for him to release her again, she'd have to do exactly what he said, up to and including gaining weight. She was so damned hard-headed, like all women, like his beloved mother. Thinking on his mother upset him, but he did it anyway. Poor Mom had just wasted away up in her bed. That was why he wanted Brandy brought back to health again. He had never acted to save his mother, because he had been a damned useless child when she passed on. He had sworn to himself that if he ever saw another woman suffering away, he would intercede and help her regain herself. That promise had been made flesh in the form of Brandy Manson. Using hypnosis on Brandy, he was able to make her stoned just by telling her that she was stoned. How simple for her mind to reuse the stored cannabis sativa, locked away within it from past pharmaceutical abuse. He had left her stoned, in fact, the night he'd had to run out into the approaching blizzard, the night he had been snowed away from home. She probably slept well that night, and by the next morning had come out of it. Whether or not her mind actually used the trace elements of the dope, or whether it was just his suggestion, he didn't know for sure. All he knew was that it worked somehow, and as Jonathan Asbury used to say, "If it works, what the hell?" He drained his beer can and tossed it accurately across the room towards a great trash can. 2 points. Yes. If it works, what the hell? Reaching over, he switched on his PA system to monitor Brandy's voice as she talked to herself. He grooved on doing that, he really did. Spying on her was soothing to his voyeuristic nature. He wished he could see her, but all he had on was his audio equipment, parabolic mics and stuff stolen from Berkeley, now wired up to his house in strategic points, to catch all the sounds coming from inside the place. He put one foot up on the other, his boots old and dirty, but still fighting ready, and he lay there, listening for her to say something. "Sing for me, Brandy," he murmured, folding his great hands across his chest. The room was cold, and soon he'd have to build a fire in his kerosene heater to withstand it out here. Right now he was too tired to care. All that walking had ragged him out, something fierce. Listening to his PA speaker, which was wired into a stereo system that was capable of cracking the dirt walls down here, he prepared himself to hear Brandy as she would walk about the place, bitching at him and cussing about him, and then finally singing and laughing to herself. But when he heard the first transmission from the house, his eyes flew open, and all thoughts of sleep escaped him for good. He sat up slowly and rubbed his beard, listening to the voice as it spoke, hearing clearly every word that was said. "So," he whispered, and very slowly got to his feet. Echo stood on the second level of Unit C, staring out towards her old apartment. It was empty now, and she felt her throat tighten just a little bit. Mama was gone. She was in jail, or a rehab unit. She was somewhere, and they would never again share an apartment at Princess Arms together. The part of Echo that still loved her mother mourned the passing of that particular age. Echo stood very still and let it happen. When she looked up again, it was over. The rest of Echo felt intense, pleasurable relief. Echo was still so sore she couldn't stand the pain at times. The doctors had given her Tylenol 3, the stuff with codeine in it, and that did help a lot. She still cried herself to sleep, but that was more self-pity and loss of Kaina than anything else. She wished to God they'd find her already. Mrs. Cherbourg, God love her, had taken care of everything. Echo didn't even have to go back to her old apartment again. Mrs. T had gone in there with the police, and had taken all of the little girl's things, even the sex book Mrs. T had given her. She had found it under Echo's mattress like a dirty secret. That bothered Mrs. Cherbourg. Echo could keep her books, all of them, on the shelves where they belonged, in Deanna Cherbourg's house. Echo continued to climb up the steps, trying not to look down the hall too much as she made the third landing. She did look too much anyway, and felt her throat tighten again. She would need her new mother, Mrs. Cherbourg, to sit up with her at night and hold her while she cried her eyes out. Yet, even though she knew she was going to cry tonight, it would be better with Mrs. Cherbourg there. Bonnie was good company, but she got off at 6, and after that it had been a long cold night, with just the occasional passing uniform to smile in on her. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Mrs. Cherbourg would make them hot cocoa, and she would get up on the bed with her, and talk and confide and console, all Echo wanted. Mrs. Cherbourg had unlimited energy when it came to her new favorite daughter. She had called Echo her favorite girl, and that was special to Echo. She was special to someone. That felt really good. Echo pushed the door open as the yellow cab containing her father drove out of sight below her. He waved up to her as he made the main road, staring up from the back seat. Echo smiled and waved back. She stood watching his cab go out of sight. When she was convinced he could no longer see her any more, she turned around to greet Mrs. Cherbourg. She was making spaghetti for them, and it smelled divine. Echo's favorite dish. Echo sniffed a little and tried to save her tears for later. Mrs. Cherbourg had told her that because she was still hurting physically, she could expect to cry a lot. But Echo didn't want to cry too much. Mrs. T was trying so hard to make her happy, and Echo knew it hurt her to see her cry like that. Mrs. T felt badly for her. She wanted everything to be perfect for Echo. Echo told her it was perfect, but now she would have to show her that it was. Mrs. T had poured her a small glass of Burgundy. Echo saw it over on the nice table, all spread and ready for them. Echo could have a little wine, the doctor had said, and Mrs. T was wasting it on her. Echo couldn't believe it. No one before had ever offered Echo any wine with a meal. She wasn't worth it to anyone but Mrs. Cherbourg. Echo was worth a lot to Mrs. Cherbourg, she was finding out. Her father had taken Echo off to Coney Island for a week. This had been up to the discretion of Mrs. Cherbourg, of course, but she insisted that her father take her, if Echo wanted to go, and felt like going. Echo's injuries were bad, but they had healed miraculously. Her jaw wasn't broken after all, where her mother had clubbed her with the lamp. Her back had healed up, and all the cuts and bruises that the cord had inflicted on her were not as swollen as they had been. The doctor released her remarkably quick, thought Mrs. Cherbourg, but she was more than happy to get her back. She had looked forward to having the young girl live with her for a while, for as long as she wanted. It would break through all that loneliness that Deanna Cherbourg had lived with for so many years, since the death of her husband. She hadn't even minded giving her up a week for her father. Echo walked up to Mrs. Cherbourg and wrapped her arms around her. "Hi, precious," said Mrs. T. "How was your trip?" "Fine, Mama," said Echo, holding her tightly. "Just fine." Brandy and Kaina had begun to feel strange now. Since they had discovered the dead telephone, both of them were on pins and needles. A bad vibration was passing through the air, and neither of them could quite decide what was wrong. The day was getting late, but somehow both of them were afraid to stay in the house tonight. They had sat looking at each other for some time, before Kaina finally spoke. "We," she said, weakness in her voice, "have to get out of here." This was not an option, it was a mandate. Both girls felt like they were being watched, even though they knew this was impossible. It wasn't as if they felt he was watching them, it was as if the house was watching them. It was as if it had been awakened and was listening in on them. It was. "I'm ready, Kaina," said Brandy. I don't understand what it is that comes over me, but please, get me out of here before it comes back again." Kayana understood this. The captor had been doing something to Brandy to make her screw shit. It was some sort of mental thing he did to her. Kayana reached out her hand and took it. "We have to go now, Brandy. He's coming. I know he's coming. Let's not pack anything. Let's just—" She looked around and shuddered. "Let's just go." Brandy was standing beside Kayana now and nodding in agreement. "How far is it to Ashwood, do you think?" asked Brandy. "Can we make it today?" Kayana looked at her watch. It read 1:15. It was 7 miles to the city limits. If they could make 4 miles an hour, they'd be there well before it got too dark to see. Kayana didn't know how deep the snow was, but there had to be someone along the way. There had to be someone out here that didn't keep girls in upstairs rooms against their wishes. Some other farmhouse. Kayana was ready to go and see just what was out there. She ran and got her knife and told Brandy to get herself one, if she wanted to. Brandy didn't want a knife. She'd lose it. She'd already lost the one she'd given her anyway. "You protect me, Kayana," said Brandy. Kayana smiled and nodded. "I'll do my best. Come on." On the way out of the room, Kayana grabbed a bottle of the brandy. The nice screw-on tops didn't need any bottle opener, and so Kayana hugged it close to her as she went, a bottle in one hand and a blade in the other. They started down the steps slowly, almost fearfully. "What's different, Kayana?" Brandy was asking as they descended the steps. Kayana didn't answer her. She just walked deliberately, putting one foot in front of the other, and down. Kayana was spooked now. Something was wrong, and they both had sensed it. They reached the bottom of the steps, and Kayana looked longingly over at her bags. She could not see them. They were behind the couch. She decided to just leave them and get out. Never before had Kayana felt such a compulsion to get out of a place. Her fear was making her physically weak, and she could not understand it. Just as they both were about to open the deadbolts on the front door, they heard something fall over downstairs. Kayana threw the bottle and the knife down and reached, grabbing for the locks on the door. She had the first one back and the second one, and was working on the third one when Brandy screamed. Kayana did not have to ask what it was. She had heard it too. It was the sound of heavy steps, the heavy sounds of someone running up the basement stairs. Kayana thought she was going to pass out. Fear like a wave of heat washed over her, and she realized that they were about to get caught. She wanted to pray and she wanted to scream, but all she could do was try and move in the molasses of the next few passing seconds. She forced all of her energy towards opening the old door. If she could just get it open, she thought, she could run. She could outrun the devil himself if she could just get this door open. The basement door, which adjoined the dining room, was built to look just like the pine paneling of that room. There was a small pine knot-colored handle that was locked the one time Kayana had tried to turn it, and she had never since tried to turn it again. She really hadn't wanted to go down there anyway. She was seeing in her mind's eye now the image of that door as it sat perpendicular to the stairs leading up. Kayana wondered how that worked, but she didn't care right now. All she cared about was the small lock holding whatever was coming up those basement steps. If it could just hold for a few seconds longer. As she got the front door open, there was a terrific crash behind them. There was a deafening silence, and then smoke. Blue smoke. It came wafting around the old foyer and out into the hallway. Kayana grabbed Brandy and tried to run with her out the front door, but Brandy was holding her back. Brandy wasn't being dragged out like Kayana was pulling her. Kayana couldn't hear Brandy screaming. Kayana let her go and ran outside. Just about the time that Kayana realized someone had been holding Brandy, she registered Brandy's scream. "He's got her," she thought, and ran as hard as she could across the porch, to the edge of the impossibly high wall of snow. There was no way to get through that, she knew. He had her too. She gulped a sob and made a low moaning scream as she prepared herself to leap out into the snowbank and scurry through that mess as best as she could. A deafening sound dropped her to her knees painfully. How that had happened she would never figure out. She had been set on leaping out into the snow when this terrific bang had somehow dropped her to her knees. The pain in her knees was incredible, and filled her with a watery nausea. She felt momentarily sick to her stomach, and then realized why she had dropped like she had done. Her autonomic nervous system had taken over. A doctor would have told her that her reflexes were excellent. Caiana Erbicum had just been shot at. She lay there quivering, too terrified to move, too terrified to even open her eyes and look around. The front porch was cold, but she kept her pretty little face on it, face down against it. She shivered and didn't dare try to move. She made terrified noises in the back of her throat. She had even peed her jeans just a little bit. Brandy was crying loudly, and she heard heavy boots walking up behind her. She knew who it was, and she hated to even think about it. She just wanted the porch to open up and swallow her whole. She just wanted to disappear forever. She felt a long, cold barrel poke her in the back, as if she were a dying deer. "Get up," said an unbelievably heavy voice. Caiana didn't move, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't. Fear held her down like 10 penny nails in a 2x4. A hand reached down and grabbed her by the top of her head, taking a large and deciding clump of Caiana's hair with it. She followed her hair as it went straight up, and Caiana was amazed at how easily she followed it up. She was being held like a Cupid doll hanging from a rear-view mirror. His hands and arms were incredibly strong. Caiana felt the hand turn her whole body by her hair until she was just like a ballerina, spiraling on her tiptoes around to see the face of the captor, the man she had been dreading to see all this time. He was as ugly as sin. She looked at him, wincing from the pain in her head. He was not really hurting her, holding her like that, but she wanted to look hurt. She wanted to get some sympathy any way she could. She was trembling like a leaf. He held her, looking at her closely. She could almost feel the scratchiness of his awful beard, the ends of it reaching out to get her, to touch her on her face. His smell was of metal and gun-cleaning solvent. His breathing was hard and deep, yet he seemed to hold her effortlessly above his head. He lowered her down to her feet again and released her. Caiana felt relief for just a moment as her feet touched the ground. She was just about to consider running again when she felt a heaviness come over her, a heaviness that she couldn't explain. She had never felt this way before in her life. As Caiana looked at the captor, who stood nearly 2 full heads taller than she was, Caiana gave in to her weakness. She passed out cold. She would never know that he had caught her before she was halfway to the floor of the ice-covered porch. Dreams, shadows and things. Caiana surfaced slowly, coming up like an air bubble in a bottle of liquid soap. She felt strange and her mouth was dry. She was not right. Something wasn't the same anymore. This is it, Caiana. She was naked. She was lying under an old quilt, and she was by the stove in a very old cabin. As Caiana saw all around herself, she knew that she was safe. She knew that, whatever had happened to her, it would be all right now. It was very peaceful in here. Caiana tried to sit up and felt a weakness coming against her. A warm hand touched her gently on the arm, and Caiana looked up into the kindest eyes she had ever seen. "Hello," said the man, his voice as smooth as honey. "Hi," said Caiana, trembling beneath the quilt, even though she was as warm as toast by this fire. "I reckon I ought to apologize, missy," he said, rubbing his totally bald head with his hand, "but I just couldn't let you get pneumonia." "What do you mean?" she asked him. He blushed. He actually blushed. Caiana giggled internally. "You being naked and all, and well, and all," he stammered. "And why am I naked?" asked Caiana, her coyness coming out of her shamelessly. She squirmed around under the quilt and rubbed her legs together warmly. There was a heat in her belly that she was enjoying, and a little girlness in her movements that she was reveling in. Caiana felt sexy and good. "'Cause you fell through the ice, little lady," said a man. "Don't you remember?" Caiana smiled and laughed. Her laugh sounded pretty. "I remember," she said, and then lowering her eyes, she added, "Yule." He didn't seem to understand at first. His eyebrows, heavy and full over his steel-gray eyes, came together in wonder. Then he figured it out, and his eyebrows relaxed again, leaving only the wrinkled brown leather of his forehead. "Oh, you can call me anything you like, little lady," said the man, getting up to fetch himself another pewter mug of coffee. "You like a cup yourself?" Caiana nodded, and he fixed her one. He poured them both just a hair of whiskey in their cups, and he smiled as he handed Caiana hers. "You appreciate good coffee," he said, sipping his, a wry look of enjoyment on his brown face. "You appreciate good coffee, you'll love this. It's Colombian gold, and the whiskey's the best 12-year they make, short of C.C. itself." Somehow Caiana knew that C.C. was Canadian Club. Caiana smiled at him, and she knew she was in love. Oh, sure, Mama would have a German baby over this, but Caiana was in love. What Mama didn't ever know about her little girl was that Caiana had the absolute, unforgivable, eternal hots for Yule Brynner. And the older that man got, the more she creamed her little jeans over him. Not even Echo knew that. A better-kept, erotic, masturbatory secret was never kept than Caiana's obsession with Yule Brynner. But this man, God, he was beautiful. How Caiana had come to be rescued by this man she would never know. She had been asleep for a long time. All she could remember was walking through the snow and then cutting across a field. She thought it was a field, anyway. She walked and walked, figuring that Ashwood couldn't be too far from where she'd stopped her car. It had been snowing, and the blizzard did hit Madras after all. In fact, it had damn near wiped out the countryside. But the flat field upon which Caiana had been walking was no field at all. Caiana had remembered seeing this man, and had waved to him. "Thank God, he's seen me," she said. "He's seen—" And then she heard a terrific cracking sound just below her feet. It was as though the earth had opened up to swallow her whole. Caiana screamed, and she felt herself falling. The great slab of ice she'd been standing on rose up, throwing her off to her left. As she landed, she felt the thin layer of freshly fallen snow give way to a terribly thin layer of ice. Caiana had disappeared beneath the top of the ice, into the cold, unbelievably cold water beneath her. "It's a miracle I was there for you," the man was saying, shaking his head. "You wouldn't let anything happen to me," said Caiana demurely. The old man laughed. "I swear, little lady, I believe you're a little bit sweet on me. Ever since you've been here, you seem to fancy me some. Mind now, little lady, I'm a powerful flattered you would and all. My lady, she's been gone these past 7 years." A sadness seemed to fill his great kind eyes for just a moment. Then he straightened up and said, "You do seem to favor Elizabeth just a tad, you know." "It's nothing to be ashamed of," said Caiana, looking at the stove, her eyes carefully diverted from his. "But yes, Yule, I have to say that these last few days have been terrific. You are one fantastic host, and you have taken splendid care of me. I feel," she exhaled, sighing musically, "I feel like a queen." Caiana had been on this small bed for 3 days. The fall through the ice had hurt her, and she had slept most of the time, naked and warm under this blanket. The few times she had regained consciousness they had talked, like now, and every time she woke up, he would apologize for her being naked. She didn't want to put those old stiff jeans on just yet, though. She was just happy to lay here and squirm contentedly. "I think," he was saying slowly, "that I can get you through to Ashwood this day, if you can travel." The thoughts of leaving Yule made her sad. She didn't want to leave him. She wanted to stay with him. She wanted to kiss him and make love to him and do it with him and all of him. She wanted a baby by him, and she wanted to spend the rest of her life right here with him on this old couch. He sensed this and placed his great old hand over on her small one. "I'm old enough to be your grandfather," he said quietly. She felt a tear form in the corner of her eye. She sniffed and licked her lip. He stood up and got her clothes off the makeshift line where they'd been for 3 days. "It's time I let you go," he said softly. He turned to her. Kayana knew she must leave him, but she hated it. All the while she was up putting her clothes on, she hated it. She felt sick to her stomach, mostly from lying in bed for 3 straight days. She was constipated as well, and she'd not eaten anything other than his excellent soup and crackers. She felt like she'd lost weight, and maybe she had. She was hungry. She had a god-awful headache from lying down so long. Kelly would say that was what it was. You always get a headache lying down so much. She dressed and realized that all of her suitcases were still in her car. She did have her small overnight bags, though. By some stroke of fortune, she'd thrown them clear of her and the hole she'd fallen into. All of her things were bone dry inside, according to Yule. "What's your real name?" Kayana asked him, as she wrapped up in her coat. It, too, was dry by this time. He'd spent 3 days drying her things out for her. He'd done a superb job with her coat. She couldn't tell it had ever been immersed in the icy pond at all. "Yule," he smiled, and she laughed. "No, really, what is it? What is your name?" "You can call me Yule, like I said," he told her. "Robert is so plain, and if my new girlfriend wants to call me Yule, then that's who I am." "I am your new girlfriend," said Kayana, feeling the thrill go through her as she touched his arm. "I know that you think it's because you rescued me that I'm in love with you, but you'll see, Yule, when I get better, I'm coming to visit you. I live here now, with my mom and stepdad. They live over in Ashwood, like I told you." They were walking outside his trailer and into the cold, snowy air. It was a gray sky out today. Kayana loved overcast days, and the Scorpio in her thrived in this snuggling weather. Now she snuggled up next to Yule for support, and he put his arm around her, assisting her down the steps of his trailer. She felt very safe in his arms. "Can I come and see you?" asked Kayana hopefully. "If you want to," he said, snuggling up to her. "And I want you to know, Kayana—" He paused, as if he shouldn't say what he was thinking. "That the feelings you have for me, well, they could have been mutual. Hell, they are mutual. I know that we're years apart, and I look on you as my daughter. Still, Kayana, were I a young buck, I couldn't do any better than you." There, he said it. He'd said it, and she felt a lot better. He was feeling it, too, and was man enough to admit it. "I'm going to hold you to that, mister," she said, laughing happily. He shook his head in a slow, old macho cowboy way that thrilled her bottom no end. He stared down at her, the crow's feet in his eyes winking at her. "Hell, I'm an old man," he said. "It's just a crush, and we both know it." He swatted her lightly on her behind as they got alongside his truck. He opened the door and helped her in. She carefully climbed in, her head expanding like a hot air balloon. It was going to hurt like a bitch in this cold air. The drive down the road was bumpy and still full of snow. They made their delicate way to the Ashwood city limits, and then took that blue Dairy Farms turnoff that Kelly had promised her nearly a week ago. The old farmhouse came into her view all too quickly, and she fought for something to say, something that would show her gratitude for all he'd done for her. "You live really close to us," she said, hoping to get a response. "You can come and see me if you like, Kayana," he said, "but I hope you don't lose your heart on me. That'd hurt me to see you pine away like that. I know I've been good to you, but I don't have too long in the world." She was shocked to hear this. "How do you know?" she asked him. "Simple. Hoot owl outside my window now, 6 nights in a row. That's a sure sign he's coming. Old man Death, baby. He's coming for me, Kayana." But he looked over to her, and the leathery smells of his truck and his deer-hide jacket wafted pleasantly towards her. "And when he does, Kayana, I'm going to grab his hand and shake hell out of it." Kayana laughed out loud to spite herself. "You wouldn't," she teased him. "Well, not if I knew you was going to miss me," he said, quietly. "So don't you set your cap for me, little lady. One of these days a boy your age will get for you, and you can have an old man once you both age." Kayana sniffed again and saw that they were at the house already. Too soon. 3 days walking through the snow. She couldn't have got here fast enough. Now she wished that they could have had hours to ride and talk together. "Kayana," he asked, stopping the truck, "I want you to know that I think you're a very special lady, and I want you to smile for me and go. Please?" Kayana understood. Their special time was over now, and he really didn't see any point in her coming to visit him. Kayana smiled bitterly and reached over to kiss him goodbye. He accepted her kiss graciously and hugged her back gently. "Goodbye, Kayana Erbicum." She sniffed again and her voice cracked. "If you get sick or anything, you come here, Yule. We'll take care of you. We'll make sure you're all right." Kayana's little heart was breaking, and Yule looked as though he felt for her, too. Poor Kayana, who fell in love so very easily. "I will, Princess," he said. "Bye." "Bye," she said, and shut the door, dragging her bags up to her shoulders, hitching their straps with a pair of heavy shrugs. He smiled again and started to drive away. A voice in Kayana's head told her that she would never see him again. She turned towards the house now and started up the hill. The wind blew cold against her, and she could see a light on inside the place. Mama was in the house, she knew, but somehow Kayana's loving little heart was confused. In her soul she realized she had just lost someone very special. "Be happy to see your mama now, Kay," she said to herself. "Grow up." It seemed to Kayana as she made her way to the front porch that she was always trying to grow up. She was also beginning to wonder if it was worth it to grow up or not. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door and waited. Chapter 15. The next thing that Kayana knew, her mother was all over her. Kayana remembered the door opening, and then Kelly standing there, her hair in a wild rat's nest of tangles. That was all. Kelly had not let her say a word. She had just grabbed a hold of her, howling with joy. Great long tears rolled down her face in hot streams that Kayana felt against her own face. "Oh, God love you, child," she'd screamed into her ear. Kayana smiled and choked back her own emotion, realized how exhausted she really was, and her throat was very dry, terribly dry. "My God, child," said Kelly loudly, "where have you been?" "It's a long story," said Kayana sleepily. "May I come in?" Kelly laughed loudly again, and Kayana wished she wouldn't yell out like that. It was hurting her ears. Kayana felt like she had been drunk for a week or something. Her head was made of pneumatic rubber and throbbed like a sledgehammer was bouncing off it. As Kayana came into the house, there stood Don. He gave her a very stern look that asked a very simple question of her. Where had she been the last week? He was just about to hit her, Kayana thought fearfully, and she hoped her mother wasn't too stupid with elation not to notice his obvious hot displeasure. "What the hell's the matter with you?" she thought. He said nothing, but he crossed to the window, looking out of it. Great. He'd spotted Yule, of course, bringing her up here. Damn him. She'd come all this way so he could give her shit for the people she knew and loved. Damn him. Kayana braced herself for the inevitable questions which would follow. "Who's your buddy?" asked Don, almost spitefully. He stared at Kayana and made her skin crawl. She started to answer him, but Kelly cut her off. "Out!" she screamed at Don. "Get your ass gone! Damn it, Don, I don't even want to see you now. Just get out. Go play in the garage or somewhere. I am not in the mood for you, and neither is Kayana." Kayana was shocked. Oh, the honeymoon must be over, she thought, as she listened to Kelly give him what for in no uncertain terms. He blew air out of his cheeks, realizing how he must have sounded just now, and he shambled from the room like a whipped puppy. Kayana heard the door close as he walked outside without his jacket on. But all was not well with Mother now. As Kelly turned back to her daughter, her face had fallen, had changed drastically. It was Kelly's "you might be in deep shit, Kayana Shea Erbichem" look. Her eyes were wild and her mouth was set. It was as if Don had given her the idea to lambaste Kayana instead of him. The tearful reunion was over now, and Kayana saw the storm clouds a-comin'. "Where have you been, Kayana?" Kayana's head pounded. I was caught." She swallowed, her throat tightening. She grunted and tried to clear it. "The storm, Mama. My car's still out on the road." "What road?" asked Kelly. "What road is this?" Boy, thought Kayana, she'd better like my answers or I'm going to get a beating. She hasn't talked to me like this since the time I stood up to her and didn't sit down too well for a few hours. Kayana was afraid she might say the wrong thing. Her mamma was well within slapping distance now. Proceed with caution, she told herself. "Where have you been staying?" asked her mother, in measured, no-shit tones. With a man," she said, wincing how that sounded. "An old man, mamma. A wonderful old man. He has a trailer just down the road from us here. Who is he, Kayana? Why didn't he see you to the door?" "I've never had a date before in my life, mamma," thought Kayana, "and here you are giving me hell. You act like he knocked me up or something." "He saved my life, mamma. I fell in a pond and he pulled me out." Kelly looked at her and trembled. "There is no pond out here, Kayana," she said. "Nowhere is there a pond." Kayana stared at her hard. She didn't say anything at all. "Who is this man, Kayana? I have to know who he is." Kayana couldn't line up her thoughts now. No pond out here? There sure as hell was a pond out here. She ought to know. She'd been in it since Kelly had seen her last. "I don't know his name," said Kayana. "Robert is as far as we got." "Robert, huh? Doesn't sound very old to me. Listen to me, Kayana. I am just about to lose my mind over you." She walked over and she drew the drapes. She then shut the front door securely, and locked it. Then she went over and locked the side door, pulling those drapes as well. She then cut on the great overhead lamp in the living room, and approached Kayana deliberately. "You couldn't call me from wherever you were, Kayana?" That is, he didn't have a phone." "I see," said Kelly. "Stand up, Kayana." Kayana stood up. It didn't dawn on her to question her mother. Kelly was still the iron fist, and Kayana knew it. She stood up, and her mother reached out and took her hand. She led Kayana down the hallway towards the back rooms. She took Kayana into a back room which had to be their bedroom, from the condition of the bed and the things which were scattered about it. Parents didn't keep any nicer rooms than their children did, thought Kayana, as they entered. She put her hands behind her back as Kelly released her hand. Kayana stood in her submissive stance, not looking up. Kelly was going to do something. She went over as Kayana watched her, and she got a flashlight out of the drawer. She then went over and locked the bedroom door, turning to her daughter. "Take your clothes off," she said to Kayana. "Everything. Take off every stitch you have on." Kayana felt her hands move to her shirt hem and began to lift it. Before she had a chance to argue, Mama wasn't going to take a lot of shit off little girl right now. Best not to push her. Kelly walked into the small master bathroom while Kayana obeyed. When Kayana was completely naked, her mother told her to get up on the bed. An idiot could have figured out what she was going to do now. Kayana sighed deeply, a great ponderous sigh. She closed her eyes and shivered as she sat there naked. Kelly had not watched her undressed. She had been in the bathroom. Now she hurried her daughter to do as she instructed. "Let me see," said Kelly, as Kayana dutifully assumed the gynecologist stance, her legs out like they were in stirrups. Kayana looked the other way in a furious blush, just as she did when the doctor looked at her. She tried to tell her mother that she was all right, that she was still intact, but the words wouldn't come. She bit her lip and winced as her mother checked her over. It was still there. Her little hymen was as intact as it had ever been. "Satisfied?" asked Kayana snottily. Her mother glared up at her. "No," she said, standing up. "No, I'm not. I still don't know what you've been up to the last week, but you look ruined. Your eyes are all out of focus, and you look like you've been taking something. What have you been doing?" She told Kayana to roll over, as Kayana tried to answer her mother. She was on her stomach now, and Kelly told her to get up on her knees. Kayana complied as she felt her mother check her butt over. Kayana waited until Kelly was through before she answered her. "Put your clothes on now," said Kelly, switching off her flashlight, "and begin telling me everything. From the beginning." Kayana groaned and got to her feet, looking for her underpants. There weren't any. Kayana paused for a moment. Come to think of it, she didn't recall taking any off either just now. She had two choices. She could bring this to the full attention of her mother, or she could slip her jeans on without them. She had to do something fast, or else Kelly would ask her why she was hesitating. She fought to decide which was best, but in the end she just broke down and started crying. "Mama," said Kayana, tears flowing down her face. "Help me." Now Kayana saw it as plainly as Kelly did. Her face drew up tightly. "Where in the world are your underwear, Kayana?" asked Kelly, searching in the pile of things. "Where in the world?" She looked at Kayana expectantly. "Mama, I don't know. Kelly reached out, and she slapped Kayana hard across her naked hip, soundly. "Stop it!" she hollered. "Straighten up and talk to me, damn it! I am not buying that for a minute. You don't know." Kayana stood there bawling. She wasn't able to remember why she didn't put her underpants back on at Robert's trailer. That was a vague memory now, even though it had just been 30 minutes ago. Kayana looked at her mother hopelessly. Kelly's face had changed yet again. Now it was a mask of unrelenting fear. Now her mother looked like she was as sick as she'd ever been. She was as white as a corpse. She was breathing so shallowly that Kayana didn't think she was breathing at all. She reached out and grabbed Kayana, naked as a jailbird, and she held her close. Together they sobbed and sobbed. Somewhere in the back of Kelly's mind there was an incident where her mother had slapped her for being pregnant. Now Kelly had slapped Kayana for being unable to tell her where her underpants were. But Kelly could see it plainly now. Kayana did not know where her underpants were. She really had no idea. "I'm sorry, Pumpkin," whispered Kelly to her shivering daughter. "I'm so sorry I hit you, baby precious mine. I'm so glad to see you that I just can't stand it." Kayana said nothing. She just rocked back and forth with the inertia of her mother's love. "I haven't had you all week, and the first thing I do when I see you is beat on you." Kayana hugged her mother back, grateful for her presence. Kayana felt herself give way to the little girl inside of her. Kayana just wanted Kelly to hold her if she would. After a while, Kelly told Kayana to put on Kelly's robe. Kelly wiped her eyes, and then she wiped Kayana's for her. Kayana didn't look like she was really all that aware of everything, and for this reason Kelly had given her the physical. Her body looked fine. It was her mind she was worried about. It was that awful spaced look in Kayana's eyes that bothered Kelly the most. She was really zonked out on something, and the worst part about it was Kayana didn't seem to be aware of anything really different about herself at all. Kayana had lost weight. She looked really emaciated. Normally Kayana was a few pounds heavy, and her frame designed to look good when she was. She was down about 15 pounds now. Kelly had to note this. Her naked little body didn't look like her daughter at all. No, not at all. But her eyes were the worst of it. Kayana had icy blue eyes that seemed to look sort of like the eyes of a snow wolf in certain lights. The icy blue now had an almost metallic reflection to them. She had beautiful eyes, but right now they seemed very detached and far away. This worried her mother for a while, until she thought how nice it was to be with Kayana again, in any shape or form. Kelly had thought she might be dead. If a little bit of sickness or exposure was all that Kayana would suffer, then fine. Still, Dr. Laughlin was going to get a look at her, and soon. Very soon. A mother could only check so much. It would take a doctor to tell her more, and such a man was Dr. Laughlin. They would fly back to Ohio and see this man when they could get an appointment with him. Or maybe Dr. Drewsbury, right here in Ashwood. Hadn't Don mentioned him before as having treated him? Yes, they'd go see him first off, and save that plane fare home. Either way, Kayana was going to get a complete going over, just to be sure. And if that look didn't go out of her eyes soon, she was certainly going to wade out into the cold snow and drive her there herself. The man Robert had, after all, made it here. They were no longer snowbound, thank God. They could get out of here now, and they would. Kelly slept with Kayana that first night, and sometime in her sleep her little daughter said something that chilled Kelly to the marrow. It was a simple thing, and by daylight Kelly was thinking that she was lost in a dream when she had said it. At the time, during the night, though, it had frightened Kelly pretty badly. They had been asleep on the bed. Don was in the guest room, eager to be far away from his territorial wife, who had just now regained her whelp she had been robbed of, and he was snoring loudly. Kelly had lain there, listening to him as he cracked the plaster with each open mouth roaring of his nostrils. It had been about 3 a.m., and for the 100th time that night she was thanking God for bringing Kaina back to her, alive and in one piece. That was when Kaina had said it. As Kelly had held Kaina's head against her breast, feeling her daughter's light breathing, she had heard Kaina utter a single word. She said it just once, in a sort of sleepy moan, and then she had said no more. The word Kaina had muttered was brandy. Her physical was clean. Dr. Drewsbury was wonderful, and answered all of Kelly's questions as best as he could. Kaina was still a virgin. Her hymen was stretched, of course, from all the little girl activities that sometimes ruptured the delicate membrane, but it was still holding fast. Kaina had not been raped, nor had she been anally assaulted. "I'm surprised that Kaina's hymen is so well defined," he said. He stroked his beard as he spoke outside the examination room. "Most little girls find some pretense or other to break those things early on. Modern girls, they are too active to save such things. Splits and bicycle bars get most of them these days." He smiled at her and added, "You know there's a quick little procedure we might provide Kaina with for her first intercourse. It would ensure she would suffer no undue discomfort." Kelly was not listening to this part at all. "She might want the comfort of such a surgery," he concluded, writing on his clipboard. "But her mind, doctor?" she asked. "How is that?" The doctor shrugged. "As you know, I'm a GP. I cannot give you some psychological profile. Kaina seems normal." He let his voice drag down a little bit. Kelly rose up on her toes when she heard the distortion in his voice. "However, we did find some evidence that she might have been taking methaqualone. There were traces of it in her blood work." "What's methaqualone?" asked Kelly, fear in her throat. "Quaaludes. Although we aren't sure that it was Quaaludes exactly. Might have been one of the other forms of barbituric hypnotic on the market. Unless we do a full-scale lab test, we won't be sure. Anyway, Kaina wouldn't pass a test for a job on the sheriff's department with her present lab report. I can tell you that much." "Her little girl a junkie?" He put out his hand and placed it on her worried shoulder. "Mrs. Blue, she's a grown woman, not a little girl. I want you to know this. If she's taking lewds, there's nothing you can do about it until she crashes and is hospitalized." His use of street slang, mixed with medical terminology, sickened her. "I want to know why my baby is taking dope," she muttered, shaking off his hand. He shrugged himself. "Why do they sleep with men they barely know?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "You tell me, Mrs. Blue, and we'll both know. As for Kaina's health, she's in top form. Her blood work is none of my business unless she asks for the detox program. I could counsel her, but I believe that if she did take such stuff at one time, she won't any more. Mrs. Blue, that girl is more worried about you right now than herself." That was true, Kelly knew. They worried about each other exclusively. Kelly smiled in pride. "So she'll be all right then, doctor?" "Yes, she's fine. Stop worrying about her." Kaina came out of the room and looked sheepishly at them both. "Thank you, doctor," she sniffed and took his hand. "You go and take care of your mother now, young lady. All right?" "Yes, sir," she said. "I will." As they passed by the door, he winked at Kelly, and she smiled back as they left, walking out into the bright sunlight of the morning. The police began showing up a week later. They were investigating Kelly's report that her daughter had been missing. The police, being the enterprising souls that they are, had deduced that Kaina was in fact missing. During the week, an unusual 911 call had been placed through to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. The girl sounded to be about Kaina's age, and so they were just checking. But they had done their homework. They had transferred the tape of the 911 call onto their sophisticated, highly expensive taping equipment, and they had recorded Kaina's voice on the phone talking to an investigator. The investigator had called the house and had asked to speak to Kaina directly. Naturally, that call was taped, and using that call, investigators had compared it to the truncated 911 call, and the match was perfect. Armed with this knowledge, it seemed reasonable to the police that Kaina had made the 911 call from the house that possibly Brandy Manson was being held captive in. Whether or not Kaina was in on the abduction or not, they weren't sure, but they did want to talk to her and her mother in person. "Well, for starters," Kelly was saying, "I think that it was dirty of you to call here the other day and ask to speak to my daughter for the sole purpose of recording her voice." "I don't think that's legal, boys, is it?" "It's legal, Mrs. Blue," said Investigator Reginald. "Any call made to or from a police agency is assumed to be taped. It's a standard procedure nationwide." He seemed self-assured with his answer, and swelled up in pride as he gave it to her. She sneered at him. She hated these smug bastards. They were so officious. Kelly had accepted the fact that she had lost a week of her daughter's life, and she had accepted that Kaina had essentially lost that same week herself. But once Kelly had gotten it through her head, she wanted to forget about it. She didn't want these busybody, worthless-ass police mucking it up with their affairs. They didn't want to help Kaina, and they had not found her, so they had no right to be asking her anything except forgiveness for their own incompetence. "It's fine and damn dandy, gentlemen," Kelly was saying to them, "that you can play Junior G-Man with your tapes, but I'm not impressed. Not at all. I wanted you to find my daughter. Now I would like you to leave her alone." Kelly couldn't help thinking about the third biggest lie in the world, the one that said how they were the FBI and they wanted to help you. Kaina, however, was taking it better than her mother. She sat on the couch, looking dutifully at her mother from time to time, nodding at their questions, and behaving herself admirably. She was bored, Kelly could tell, but she hid it from them very well. Only Kelly knew of her daughter's ennui, and she reached down and rubbed her daughter's head lovingly. Kaina nudged under her hand, enjoying her mother's attention. The police, trained as they are in asceticism, failed to note the love between the two of them. "Mrs. Erbickham," said Detective Reginald, "I want to ask you a few questions. I also have a quick video to show you, if I might." He had a small in-box projector that had its own 10-inch screen, like a tiny television. Stuck in the side of it was a VCR tape. "All right," said Kaina, in a daze. "First off, let's talk about Yule. That's his name, isn't it?" "His name is Robert," said Kaina. "Yule is a private joke between us." Kelly hated to hear about Yule or Robert. He was the only other person besides Echo Bradley that Kaina had ever loved. Kelly had to swallow to think about it. Mrs. Cherbourg and Echo didn't threaten Kelly when Kaina spoke of them. Yule did. He was a threat somehow to their relationship. Kelly was beginning to understand how Kaina had come to resent Don so quickly, without a reason. He was a man. Men come between women, even loving mothers and their devoted, adoring daughters, even between them. But Yule wasn't real. That was what the cop here was going to tell Kaina, and Kelly listened as he did. "There's a trailer and all," said the cop, "but there's no old man there. It's empty." "He moved," said Kaina. "He's left here." "Where did he go, Kaina?" asked Detective Frazier softly. "Back to the mountains," she whispered. "He's gone there to die, just like he said he would." "Kaina," said Detective Reginald, "there was physical harm done to you recently, wasn't there? They found traces of methaqualone in your system, didn't they? The proper street name is Ludes, Kaina. Do you use it all?" Kaina's color left her face. "I have never used dope," she said, looking at her mother for support. Her mother patted her shoulder firmly, backing her up. "I see," said the man, not believing a word she was saying. "And if I told you that Yule wasn't real, I guess you'd say that he was real, wouldn't you?" She stared at him pitifully, as though he couldn't grasp her reality at all. "You ever hear of Brandy Manson?" asked Detective Frazier, in his quiet, non-accusing voice. "Yes," answered Kaina. "Who hasn't?" "Do you like her?" asked Detective Reynolds. Kaina felt her mother nudge her now. Now was not the time to tell them that she hated her guts, like she used to say to Echo. Kaina shrugged and said, "She's nothing special. Why?" Kaina felt her head begin to ache. Every time they mentioned Brandy here lately, Kaina would get this awful headache. "She really does make me sick," thought Kaina, as she rubbed her head. "This is from an MTV clip," said Detective Frazier, running the machine. The leader tape showed up in bright red and faded to a comfortable yellow. It read in bold black letters, "Property of Jefferson County S.O. Evidence and Prop Room." The video kicked in, and a pretty girl's navel came onto the screen. There was a movement of the navel, and then the camera panned back to show a sweaty, wild-looking woman gyrating hypnotically.